Hello, and welcome to the Wonkette Weekend Live Chat. I'm Robin Panaki, and this is the lovely and talented Stephen Robinson, whose hair I really like again this week.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. Your hair looks lovely as well. Uh,
I cut my own bangs,
oh,
and
I don't cut my own hair, so I am impressed by that. So, jumping right into things, you had covered a bit of silliness in Tallahassee, Florida, that also is connected to sort of the whole charter school
well, because it was a charter
debate.
school.
hmm could you just summarize that article for folks who might not have read?
Okay, so uh, just like an actual episode of The Simpsons from season 2, a school principal got fired or was asked to resign because an art teacher showed kids a picture of the statue of David, who is, naked, uh, without giving the parents 2 weeks' notice. Because and the children were scarred for life, apparently, because it's like pornographic. And yeah.
And this is one of those things that could only occur at a charter school because of the lack of protections a lot of the teachers have there. Is that correct?
Well,
That
yeah,
they don't
there's no
have the same.
union. There's no union. And as the chairman of the board, who was the person firing or telling the principal to resign or get fired, said, he was like, oh, this is an at-will employment school. We could have just fired her for no reason, which is also terrible. That's why, they've had 3 principals in 3 years. Clearly, that's not great. And so the parents are also, in addition to the parents being upset about the statue of David, they're also upset about the high turnover rate and the fact that teachers don't stay at these schools. So, whoops.
That's often connected. They don't particularly have the best. I mean, charter schools have always been spun as this is where you're going to get, because they're siphoning off taxpayer funds. But the idea is these are taxpayer-funded institutions that are privately run, and of course, we'll have that free market competition. You'll get the best teachers. There's true accountability that they can't, that they will, if they don't get results. Like, they're running a school like a business, except you can't really do that because you can't just kind of, let's just close this because it's no longer working. And there's been a whole
not
issue.
Great for kids, that kids need stability. And the fact that these charter schools close all the time with almost no warning sometimes is not great for kids. Like, they need to be in the same school as much as possible. I was the new kid once, and that was enough. Or twice, actually, I guess. But yeah, like, it's not good.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it also, they sort of do all they can. So the whole concept of public education is that everyone gets an education if you're a minor. Even though Lauren Bobart is not a fan of that. She insists on entering into education debates, but she here says like there should be no the Department of Education should not exist, and there should be no public schools. So
well, they want no federal fund. Trump said it last week also. They want no federal funding for education, which is, kind of a bad idea, especially for a lot of red states that very much rely on federal funding in order to function and like actually have schools that have employees and teachers and what have you. And part of the problem with these charter schools is that they take those funds away from the public schools that need them and give it to private entities.
Yes, I mean, they claim that they are meeting sort of standards of public education, but they don't really. They do everything they can to, and I covered a bit of this last week. So some of this, they will kind of gently discourage people with kids who have special needs. Of like, maybe you wouldn't be comfortable here.
But they actually just don't a lot of the time they just straight up do not have the services for kids with special needs or IEPs or what have you.
Yes, they don't deny it. They cannot deny the kids, but they can just not have, so that anyone of a brain would not go there. So they do everything they can to try to make it so that they can get short-term results, right? So they get quote unquote the best students and they get the best test scores, and it looks like everything's great. And they feed on the idea that for families whose students are perhaps in a school where the school itself is underfunded, or that there are other challenges, either violence or whatever, that can be rectified by the shiny new charter school. But it's sort of very much a misleading proposition. And as you said, they kind of they can close rapidly and quickly.
They don't have to adhere to the same education standards a lot of the time. This school adheres to like some crazy ass Christian college, Hillsdale Christian colleges. Is that the name of the school? I think it is. Classics curriculum, which is basically all white dudes.
Well, they still got the lady. Yeah. Still got the lady
with an
fired.
with a Bronte sister thrown in for flavor, I guess. Yeah, it's not exactly the most diverse curriculum out there.
The yeah, and also a lot of these schools, there's whenever there's sort of a school shooting or other issues, they will trace back and say this kid was a problem, he should have been expelled much earlier. And Mother Jones had a great article about this as well, of a lot of the rush to that is actually counterproductive. Like sometimes if a child has issues, early intervention in those issues can prevent long-term problems. So, because obviously if you expel a kid and they're pissed and there's guns everywhere, you're not actually preventing.
Yeah, no, that's not really going to help anything.
But there's that sense, and it happens a lot. They've been leveraging this a lot. In Virginia, there was a whole issue where a student had allegedly gone into the girls' bathroom and sexually assaulted. There's no evidence that this person was trans, that the student was trans, but during the Virginia governor's race, that was a big issue, and it became something that Republicans very much put out there, an idea that schools are protecting our woke values and not looking out for kids. But in all these cases, there's a sense of, the rush to judgment is not like, you can't just expel a kid for no reason, just like you can't fire a teacher for just like one person said something that this teacher might have done in class. There's a process. So what happens is and it came up in Florida with the Democratic lieutenant governor had been at a school, not even at the same time, but at the school where a teacher who was found to have assaulted some students was not summarily fired. But there's a long process to figure out sometimes what happened or what not. There's often also, through hindsight, yes, this guy was terrible, we should have known earlier, but also that's not always the case. It's sort of the guilty until proven innocent mentality. So I think there's that, again, leveraging on that. For in charter schools, there's no protections for teachers. Students have no real, they can expel them for any, quickly rush them out. And that looks like, oh, you're putting real accountability in these schools, but you're not. You're just sort of basically tossing out kids or not educating kids so that they can then go work and, as you've written about the child labor.
Yeah, pretty much. And the thing is, they can throw out any kid at any time. Like, it's not like they have no obligation to educate anyone, whereas public schools do. And that is a huge problem. And this is the thing, like, one of the arguments that people bring up, there are a lot of arguments that people bring up in favor of charter schools that do sound reasonable on the face of it. They say like, okay, so why shouldn't my kid get to go to school free of disruptions, free of like the bad kids? Why shouldn't, my kid get to, why shouldn't kids get to choose where they want to go to school? Why shouldn't parents be able to, have the ability to choose where their kids go to school, with, like, regardless of their income level. And they're fair questions, and they're fair are like, it's fair for people to feel that way, is, I guess, what I'm saying. The problem is that they don't actually, for the most part, produce the results that people claim they do. There have been, like, there are those success schools in New York that are actually pretty terrifying when you see the videos of the teachers screaming at the kids. But yes, they do get good test scores. And that's because, they filter out the kids who are, have more ability, have more active parents. Like, their parents have to be super involved in order for the kids to be able to go to those schools. And, it's understandable, but we also need those parents at the public schools to advocate for bettering the public schools. And, I think magnet schools are great. I went to a magnet school part-time, and I liked it a lot. It was not, it wasn't a charter school, it was a public magnet school. And I think those are great as far as, like, giving people options. But charter schools are just screwed up in so many ways. Starting with the fact that we're giving public money to a private entity that has no obligation to, it's most of them are for profit. I don't think that one of the points that Jonathan Kozol, who's an education expert, and like an expert in educational inequalities, and like one of my personal heroes, one of the things that he brought up is these corporations aren't going to go to poor students and teach them about labor unions. They're not going to teach them, the critical thinking skills they need to, challenge the rich or to challenge capitalism at all. Like, they're going to be basically raising kids to be, good corporate citizens. Well, not good corporate, like good corporate, like, supporters and boosters.
Yeah, I mean, there's been something my wife and I discussed, because some of those charter schools in certain that people hype up, especially in Black communities, you go there and it's very much about kind of teaching a form of discipline and obedience that perhaps well-off white kids aren't being taught. And I use this example a lot of where I remember in school, they gave you the fake test where it's just like, read the instructions and then fill out the test. But if you read the instructions, you would know to just sign your name and turn it in. But if you skipped it, didn't follow the instructions, you were filling out like ridiculous tests, take forever. And I remember the teacher saying, well, yeah, following the instructions is good, but those kids who didn't follow the instructions are going to be your boss someday. And I'm like, what? Really? Okay, well, thanks. I thought, what is the lesson here? But that is true. Our society is very much biased towards that. If you look at kind of the heritage, obviously, of white men, more so, certainly not women of any race, and definitely not Black people, but the people who break the rules, who challenge, those are the ones we herald. So as you're kind of saying, it's kind of like kind of a system for creating compliant, not like kids who aren't going to create problems, not going to, go do their jobs and not question the system, essentially cogs. And then the other kids who are well off are getting sort of that more liberal arts, broader, wider education where they're aware that art exists and sometimes people paint sculpt penises and it won't hurt you. And but that's what people want. I mean, there's two things happening. You have, obviously, to be fair, charter schools are very popular. They have Bronx Republicans and Democrats. I think Democrats were pretty strongly opposed to vouchers, but charter were something where they were kind of falling into the habit of like getting involved. So what you have is a system of there isn't a lot of commitment towards public education right now. And you have, again, like sitting Senate like Lauren
But
Boebert
others
saying
are
there
just like,
shouldn't have
well,
been one.
that's fine. We'll just give up on public education entirely. Like that's really not the solution that we should be looking for. Charter schools are just as bad as vouchers, and we're actually about to head into an era of like openly religious charter schools. Hold on, I got to look up the exact Supreme Court decision. It's on my little notes here. I believe, is it? Yes. So Carson versus Macon basically said that Maine couldn't exclude religious schools from their voucher system because that was discrimination against religion, and that really opened the door to, they're going to have religious charter schools. So that's then like both with the vouchers and with this, it's going to be like public money going to religion as well, which is really like, it's really bad.
Well, I mean, I would say again, in fairness, these religious institutions, it's not so much they're teaching like it's more of the philosophy. They're teaching a philosophy that what these school boards are trying to do, what DeSantis and others, it's the same philosophy. It's just sort of like, it might as well be a religious school. They want to sort of, queer people don't exist. We're not going to talk about queer people. Yeah. We're not going to talk about slavery. Unless we talk about slavery, we're going to talk about it in the way that the church was used to enable, because Nietzsche called it slave morality, because that's the idea of like, it's okay, be a slave, and in heaven everything will be great, and don't kill your master. That would be terrible. Don't poison the food, anything like that. And so that is sort of what they're kind of doing. It's a similar philosophy to the point where it's hard to see distinction. I mean, maybe there's, other than uniforms, but it's like, that's the philosophy that's happening in these public schools. They don't, I mean, I think one area that some liberals are backing down on, of sort of, we're sometimes afraid to say that we are indoctrinating or that we have a position. We sort of fall onto, oh, no, we're not indoctrinating. We are objectively. Well, no, you actually wanting people to be independent free thinkers or to question, as you were describing, learn about labor unions, question, or that is a liberal position. And if you try to pretend it's objective, one, it's kind of, to me, it's
the
insulting.
Question at the party shirt that my mom got me for my first day of kindergarten was from a liberal catalog.
Yeah, you are pretending that it is objectively, is an objective position, but it's not. And so the right,
no, it's not neutral.
It's right is coming right out and saying, well, no, they're indoctrinating people, so we are going to make it objective. This came up during Supreme Court hearings. So when people got sort of caught with their pants down about the courts, and I know it's popular to sort of berate people for not understanding how important the courts were, but at the same time, the argument was never like, we need to confirm as many badass liberal judges as possible, even though Republicans were at any private event saying, we need no more suitors, we need to put in an 8-year-old hack to do our thing. We would get people, and Feinstein was famous for this, of just saying the courts are impartial, they're not partisan, all that matters is qualifications. And so what that happens is some swing voter, even if they support abortion rights, it's like, oh, okay, well, Gorsuch seems qualified. I see the resume. These are qualifications. So of course this person isn't going to overturn Roe v. Wade. Why would? And I believe what they say, as opposed to being like, no, anytime, here's the rights you are going to lose if Republicans nominate judges. So I think both with here and with education, you got to be clear that like Republicans have a clear agenda and they want children to be taught in this agenda.
They're very open about it. The school choice thing in many ways very much started in Arkansas after Brown versus the Board of Education. And it was very specifically, they gave money, they closed down a lot of the schools in general, like rather than integrate them. And so kids just had literally no school to go to, but then they paid for white students to go to special private white schools. And that was really the beginning of this movement. And there's, that's why it's probably not surprising that charter schools are also exacerbating segregation in general.
Oh yeah,
Even now, it's hugely.
I mean, that ideology, obviously the right-wing ideology is going to be taught at those schools. I don't know if there was going to be drastically different. It was just more of we just don't want to be near Black people because of their cooties. But the irony there is that the Black people who could not afford these private schools or would not have been admitted in those private schools were then left in schools that were named after their oppressors. So you had mostly in parts of Alabama or Tennessee or whatever, if it's Robert E. Lee Middle School, it's predominantly Black people there, which is just abhorrent. But that's sort of how it went. So most of the things people are trying to keep their kids away from other types of kids who are disruptive and whatever. And again, you can certainly empathize with it, and you can certainly empathize with the idea that why are we putting so much money into educating someone else's kid?
But here's the thing, I don't have kids, but I pay taxes. Here's where I have the main, a very big issue with the charter schools is that education, as much Republicans want to very much portray it as an individualistic thing, because they try to put everything down to the individual. But I don't have kids, but I do pay taxes that go towards education. Why? Because education is a public good.
Sure, but they would argue that your position as a childless person is sort of meaningless to them because you don't have a child. You literally don't have a child. So you can believe in the pie in the sky thing of public education. If you have a child that you're trying to navigate and you want to graduate from a good school, go to a good college and have this own life, people do get inherently more selfish when they have kids. It's a sort of the thing that happens.
No, I get that. I do.
So they're the ones at these school boards. It's look, I was marching in the streets 10 years ago. Now I have a kid and I want this school to get rid of any kid who potentially might be a school shooter. I don't care what I was saying in my lefty days. Here's who I am. And we need to be aware of that, because if we don't have a way to communicate with them beyond education as a public school, and I get that, I'm saying, but we are losing people on that argument. We're losing those middle-class parents because they're these schools are failing, or or they're pulling. I've seen it in Portland where people are pulling their kids from schools, and we need those parents in those schools, so they're pulling them because it's okay, well, you either have violent issues with violence you're not dealing with, or you're some other issues you're not resolving, and we have to have a solution for that, because if everyone goes to private schools, the public schools get screwed anyway.
Yeah. Well, part of the problem is that they are pulling money from they're pulling money from public schools that could be used to make those schools better. And that is a huge part of the problem, because then we have all these kids in these schools and they get left behind, and they don't have the
money
resources that they don't
will
have the
money
resources
actually help those issues though? That's the challenge though. Is there even enough money if someone is I don't essentially want my child to be in if I want my kid to be in a magnet class with the Meghan McCain school concept, when she was talking about this, right? She's in a class in Arizona. There's 10 people there. And that was the case where some of those schools were still open during the pandemic, right? Because it was very easy to social distance or whatever. It's 10 people in a class, exploring your desks. It's all the sort of good stuff. But there's no amount of money, because every kid has a right to be educated and should be educated. That's important. And it's sort of how do you balance that with parents who are just I want my kid to go to school. I don't want there to be any disturbed kid there, all those issues. It's just, I obviously don't know the answer to it. I'm saying it's a very complex issue.
And this is I get that. What I was sort of going with more for the public it's a public good thing is when they're not actually teaching the kids real history and they're teaching kids pretend history. They're not actually preparing kids for the real world. They're preparing them for the culture wars. And
but I mean,
that is not good for everyone.
But weren't they learning fake history for ever, though,
Oh yeah,
right? Like, so that's not a dramatic change. So people might argue that, like, oh well, America was still kicking ass. I don't necessarily to the extent that it was kicking ass when they believed the whole cherry tree myth, and that Thomas Jefferson, before you even heard the name Sally Hemings, and you
yeah.
just thought Thomas Jefferson really did
Well, I mean,
honestly
that was
believe.
very much due to the like an actual campaign by the Daughters of the Confederacy to essentially, because originally they, would teach kids that slavery was bad, and then the Daughters of the Confederacy were like, no, and they very much campaigned to teach the idea of slavery as a benevolent institution. Where it was like, oh no, they loved each other, they were totally fine, everything was great, and
Yes,
like, that was fine, and like that really actually did not really change much until like the 70s, really, when there were more Black academics who were like, yeah, wait a minute now, and and
yes.
that was a huge change. Like I've said before, like when my mom went to school half the year in Rhode Island and half the year in Florida, because her dad worked for Highlight Tracks, the sport of the future, according to The Godfather. And she would get taught two entirely different histories. Like she would, be taught like the normal history in Rhode Island, and then she'd go to Florida, and they'd be like, let's talk about the War of Northern Aggression. And that is what they called the Civil War for real. And I thought she was making this up for years and years and years until basically until the internet happened. And I was like, oh, that they literally did. That was not a joke.
No, they taught it that way. I mean, but it's like people still don't quite comprehend. And we've had this discussion before regarding the secession theory of how the enslaver states were inherently imperialistic. So this idea that you can just leave them alone, you can't. They're going to keep. So it's not like our aggression, because it wasn't necessarily like, oh no, you've got to stop slavery. It was more like, oh no, you can't just walk away. And so yeah, I mean, the history has been sort of twisted and turned up, and this is, as you said, everything kind of stems back. We can't really understand what's happening because they won't let us learn what's happening, sort of the vicious circle of all these reactions to it is going back to slavery. I think the 1619 Project was so on the mark and so audacious in being on the mark that is why there became this sort of collective white conservative freak out. I would say even white centrists who are sort of, oh wait a minute, I mean, you said that you can be, you can have sort of a West Wing approach to slavery. Again, America's wonderful and white folks are wonderful, but not this. And that's been this kind of intense blowback.
What I see from the right wingers out there, like, okay, well, we can do that, but then we have to teach that, like, about the good white people who were, abolitionists and stuff, and didn't want slavery, and like, yeah, no, that's fine and everything, but like, it can't just be like the story of how white people were heroes. I can't.
Yeah, I mean,
cannot be that. And that's what they want. They talk about they want their kids to have, they don't want their kids to have low self-esteem, but
yeah, just
they're
as opposed to black kids
in the real world, and they don't know what history is, and people make fun of them. Like,
well, I mean, who's making fun of them? No one knows what history is, but like they go through a sense of really believing all black people are apparently stupid until they stop being slaves and somehow stop being stupid. And like the reason that women running things or were living a certain way was because they are inherently different. I mean, that's what you're teaching. That's what you had been teaching. That's what, if you're a girl or a black child in school, that's what you are being. That was what was being reinforced, because like, here's all these great, awesome white people who built the world and created art and culture and everything. And and we're not going to have time to get to Motown, so we'll never really get to anything that you guys did. So it's sort of it's a tough role. I wanted to talk about Abbott Elementary.
Oh yeah, they're doing, like, honestly, that is one of the coolest things I've seen done on television. Like, I very much compare it to Superstore, which we also like, pushing for the value of unions and everything. And Abbott is doing such a good job explaining, like, what the problems with charter schools, I think.
Yes, and I'd written about this last week, but one of the things that really impressed me about the show, and I compared it again to a West Wing episode in 2004 about vouchers, where the black mayor of DC and then the president's black butler, or whoever the little kid, the young guy was who loved him, but he both of them were pro voucher. And so the position, and this is often a common position trying to justify vouchers and their charter schools, was that, if you talk to black people, they're the ones who, and this is familiar, people using white people as human shields, but if you talk, black people want this. And the only people who are actually pro public education were white liberals who went to fancy private schools, which is, the black mayor calls out the president and Josh Lyman, the character, who also had gone to private schools. So again, it was this sort of the idea of like, okay, well, maybe vouchers are an issue. Maybe vouchers are not so bad. And so now, almost 20 years later, this show, which is of course actually written by black people, created by a black woman, is very overtly stating, no, hold up. Here's all the issues. Here's what it's not. Here's why it's not great for the black community. Also, it's a show that doesn't present this underfunded school. It's actually a cool school. You actually would want to go to that school. The teachers care. And so often, if you would ever see sort of an underfunded school on television or in movies, it's a disaster. You either need Michelle Pfeiffer to come in and
I'm just going to say
rap
that.
from Coolio or something. But it's usually it's a disaster.
Sit in the chair backwards and just
everyone is the teachers all believe in, and Quinta Brunson, the creator of the show, was very adamant because her mom was a teacher. It was like, these teachers believe they want to help their kids, they believe in their kids, they're all awesome. The problem is the school is underfunded. The teachers are never going to be the punchline. So it's a very pro public education series, what I've never seen. I mean, often you get shows like Bad Teacher or something, where they sort of make, public school teachers are terrible, or broken or bitter. But here it's like, this is really good. And they called out one of the characters, the young white teacher, is around some charter school teachers who have just zero, such contempt for students. So they want their perfect, great students, their job, but they don't. All students, or helping anyone, they get nothing out of. And so it's sort of a very sense of being about public education. I mean, they even went so far as to challenge the concept of the gifted and talented, which has also been part of a big issue now, where never Trumpers and centrists have gone after anyone who tries to sort of change sort of that system of being sort of exclusionary or such, as being sort of, oh, this is why you're going to be losing Asian voters and middle-class black voters, because you're sort of dialing down education or whatever, as opposed to sort of potentially,
I mean, you were also in the gifted and talented program, right? Also, I think we've talked about that before. Like, we didn't really do that much in Richmond. Like, we were just doing like haikus and shit. Like, it was not helpful at all, personally. Hold on, I would just like to correct. Compare Dylan Thomas to Bob Dylan. Sorry, I confused because Michelle Pfeiffer. Neither can sing. And I thought someone was going to say, our friend Gary was saying that Michelle Pfeiffer could not sing, and I was going to refer him to a little musical called Grease 2.
Is she singing in Fabulous Baker Boys? Is that really her voice?
I think so. Yeah, no, she can sing. I mean, listen to Cool Rider. It's a classic.
Yes,
Um,
to date myself, Fabulous Baker Boys was my first exposure to her. I was not old enough to see the film in theaters, but just even the awareness of it, it was there, and I just wanted, yeah, I
yeah,
adored Michelle Pfeiffer. Grease 2, we don't need to really get into,
yeah, no.
uh, but yes,
Also an interesting take on public education. I kid.
but yes, gift and talent, I mean the same thing. And often with tract, I mean, the idea was to expose kids to, and it was true. I mean, I was in school. Whenever I was in a non-track class, because they didn't have a sort of gifted and talented version of Spanish, and it
Mhm.
was a disaster area. The teacher was, couldn't keep control of the class. It was like a lot of people throwing stuff, and it was disruptive. And I can get why that would be like, no, 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 get your kid out of here and go. So it's a very complicated issue. I do think, um, when people on the left are sort of like, oh, okay, well, let's not test kids at all, or let's not have gifted and talented at all. There's going to be pushback for that because people want their kids to
Yeah,
be prepared.
and
So
it's
you could just want to address
understandable, I
bias.
think.
But yeah, you just want to address any sort of bias in the testing, because I think there are a lot of
Oh, there are. That's
white
a lot
kids,
of
white
that.
kids getting into it that I'm like, how smart are you?
Well, that's why, like when they were looking at tracking, and there's definitely been like a movement in recent years to get rid of tracking, which is in schools when they like, just basically sort kids like here's the smart class, here's the less smart class. They were like, oh, there's a disproportionate amount of kids of color and poor people in here. Why might that be? And it was because the tests were indeed specifically and the assessments in general of the teachers were very much geared towards seeing more affluent, whiter students as like more advanced.
Oh
And
yeah,
so it was, creating a huge amount of educational disparities where these kids were not getting the education that they deserved. And
yeah,
like I understand because like when I first read about that they were, talking about getting rid of tracking, I was kind of like, because one of my personal problems in school was that things didn't go fast enough for me. Like I got very bored very easily. And I was like, oh God, that would be really like if I was in elementary school, I was mad in third grade because they were still teaching, phonics. And I was like, PH, I'm done. Um, and so I found that really frustrating when I was a kid because I was like, I can already read. I
mm,
don't know why I'm doing this. I don't know why I have to sit here. And I was like, that would have been even worse if it had to go even more slowly. But they've actually done like all these like studies, and there really isn't a difference between the way. Basically, it's better. They're better off teaching all the kids the same way, and then offering kids who need extra help. Because I was also like, I sucked in math. I didn't want to be in any advanced math courses. Um, the help outside of classes and having flex classes and things like that. And so I do get the initial like about
oh
certain
yeah,
changes, but when you actually look at them and find out that they are like the changes are in fact beneficial for everyone. Um,
yes. I mean, part of the bias is that some of those kids, depending on the area you were, and as you said, teachers, and I've seen this in the workplace, right? Like someone, if you're the white guy, sees another white guy and it's like, oh, you're sort of like me, so these issues you might have, I will send you to sort of a management course to learn how to essentially be a human being. Often those things are like, here's how to grow up,
mhm,
management courses, as opposed to just firing you or seeing you as a disciplinary issue to be dealt with. So a lot of, someone who would present it like you, but is Black or Latina in a very poor school is going to be, oh, these are disciplinary issues. They track them down to, oh, you won't sit still. Like, so they're
mhm.
very like, so, and again, a lot of those sort of school, a lot of those cases, they go, and that's into all of the lean on me and the Matthew
Yeah.
Perry did one of them. It's about, we need to get these kids to know discipline and respect. And most of that is just like, oh, you sit still, you get bored, I'm going to break that in you, or you're going to be processed out. And so that's more of like just sort of giving, you say it tons of times. So that the joke being, in a rich white neighborhood, the white kid who seems sort of spoiled and obnoxious is suddenly, oh, his problem is that he's actually like that guy in Big Bang Theory. So we need to put him in accelerated class, as opposed to the black version, the poor black version of that kid is like, oh no, you're going to wind up shooting up the school because you have no social skills and are terrible. So we're going to basically either expel you or process you out. So it's all essentially, we just respond to people differently. The problem
Oh,
is no one
absolutely. Well,
accepts.
they might look at a kid who looks more like them and automatically think, okay, well, maybe, his issues are due to a bad home life. And they might look at a kid who doesn't look like them and go like, that kid's just bad. And, that is like, I was a bad kid. So, and that is a thing that stays with you your entire life. It really does. Like, you think of yourself as being in trouble all the time, no matter what. And, I only had it like in a little, very small way, because I went to a very weirdly strict school where you couldn't talk during lunch, which you can imagine was difficult for me. You couldn't laugh either. And you tell me I can't laugh, I'd lose my shit. And it, like, I was just, I got sent to the principal's office all the time. I had to sit on the stage and eat lunch. That's what they did to you if you talked during lunch. And in my head forever was just like, I'm in trouble all the time. I'm a bad kid. And like, even though I was like basically fine. And so I would imagine like, if some kid is going through that his entire life throughout school, I can't even imagine how badly that fucks with someone's head,
well,
like, and their self-perception.
We just stopped going to school, but
Yeah.
similar to like anxiety issues. So the idea of where this corporate executive, so she could, she's a corporate executive, whatever, and she's like, oh, she'll freak out, like normal human response over something that's happening. Oh, I meant this, I needed this package to arrive today, it didn't, he'll freak out. And it's not applied to a poor person, the poor lady working 3 jobs, who has one car, if the car breaks down, or the cops pulling her over, so, oh, you got a broken tail light, here's your ticket. It's like, I can't eat if I have to pay this ticket. Any emotional response is going to wind up, now she gets shot. It's like, so it's just like, well, why they have the same degree of people. It's not just like anxiety is only an issue that you're allowed to have if you're well off, and otherwise, if you're not, you should be able to very calmly deal with every awful, terrible thing that's happening to you in your, poor life. So yeah, it's about sort of seeing sort of the equity amongst that. But again, Ron DeSantis, Republicans in Congress have been, wanting to get rid of diversity, equity, inclusion, to get rid of any sort of way of looking at results and tracing it back to perhaps implicit bias. They don't want to even talk about that. That's all.
Back to not wanting to question things. They don't, because basically what DEI officials do is they question things. They say like, okay, we're getting these results. Why are we getting these results? Well, like, why might that be? And they don't like to question things. They don't want the answer to be something that they find personally insulting. They don't want the answer to be because, teachers have implicit bias. They don't want the answers to be disappointing. So they just don't want anyone asking the questions, period.
Yes, it's but I guess bringing this all back to the charter school debate of, they want their kids to be taught a certain way. I think only way to sort of address that would be to sort of we have to sort of change how we're talking about public education, and to address the actual issues that are occurring in certain cities and areas. If we're not, Republicans are going to run roughshod over us. They are sort of I would say, winning on these issues. Certainly these, and I think what we can always do, and I get in trouble for saying that we need to adopt more right wing tactics, but like the Tallahassee thing should be something we never stop talking about.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Like she should be on television every day. That principal on whatever the liberal version of Fox. It's not MSNBC, so we just stop saying that. So some liberal
really
version of that. But that doesn't happen. So when you have any sort of weird DEI thing, Republicans run with that for ages. So anyone who's sort of like, oh no, Lincoln is terrible white man, it's one of the dumbest things, right? Like to say that is one of, so they run with that as being, though they want to take down our Lincoln statue, so we might as well leave up all the Robert E. Lee statues. So they love to jump on these things, and sort of we need to hammer all of these, because there's going to be more examples of this, more examples of just how they are failing kids, and also how they are just sort of tearing apart any sort of sense of trying to educate anyone.
Yeah, no, they don't. They're basically at this point very much trying to raise children to be as ignorant as humanly possible, so that they will grow up and vote Republican. I assume. We should absolutely be hammering this. Maybe possibly now.
Not the. I saw the Young Turks referred to as the Young Turfs.
Turks. Yeah, no, I was thinking that too when I saw that. No, that was not a great move for Anna Kasparian, but
can you explain it just very quickly for people who might have been just some kind of silly.
Hold on, let me find the actual statement, because I just want to hold on. Because I forget. She said, she tweeted, "I am a woman. Please don't refer to me as a person with a uterus, birthing person, or person who menstruates. How do people not realize how degrading this is? You can support the transgender community without doing this shit." The fact that people, the degrading thing is just weird. Like, I get that people are, do the, we find the overly precise language off-putting for whatever reason. Like, I guess there's an argument to be made for that in certain things. I don't think that's a big deal, but trying to frame it as like degrading is fucking ridiculous. Calm the fuck down.
Yeah, I mean, pregnant women are people, so people is not. But
calling a person does not offend me. Crazily enough,
but it's something that the right had leapt upon, and then you get certain people. But we need to be aware of it when our allies or supposed allies are. And I think this happens. It's not just her. It's a lot of folks who kind of freak out over this language, and I think can be easily pulled into some of the, I mean, we already have famous turf J.K. Rowling, who recently someone is like, well, and it's interesting because we had where she became Dolores Umbridge, and she recently had said that trans people are actually like the Death Eaters, which is kind of really sort of horrific. All you can sort of do is, I read the much like L. Frank Baum, who was terrible, then he died, and then I can still enjoy. I look, I'm not asking for anyone to die. I'm just, again, pointing out we're all mortal.
It was just like, he was terrible and then he died. And I think that's just like a good biography for a lot lot of people in general.
And so
widely applicable.
I can enjoy, no one judges anyone for enjoying Judy Garland and even her blackface things. Like, everyone's dead. Enjoy the work of people who are dead. I mean, that might be true of some other actors whose work I enjoy, who having legal problems that just came up this weekend. Again, it's just sort of eventually they everyone dies and you can go and enjoy their work.
Eventually everyone will disappoint you.
Well, that is the sort of issue of of the cancel culture concept, right? Like where can you just say, I appreciate this person's work. The work itself, I stand, because it's one thing if the work itself is it's like it's Gone with the Wind. It's pretty like this seems to be, or Song of the South. This seems to be minimizing the horrors of a bad thing. Whereas this, I'm watching, it's like, okay, well, I don't necessarily, at least if you were to watch one of those movies, it's not like overtly transphobic, right? So it seems like, okay, well, once the transphobe who was involved with this is gone, then you can kind of start to feel better about the whole thing. But it's a tough thing. I think I bet very soon DeSantis will insist that J.K. Rowling's work be centered in all libraries. The only work that will exist in libraries will be J.K. You take a Black History course, it'll only be J.K. Rowling.
So the funny thing is that it was, the Christians who are mad at her forever because, oh no, they're going to teach kids to do witchcraft. And they always think that, like, oh, the spells are real and all those things. But now they have to, like, defend J.K. Rowling, which puts them in, like, a hilariously bad position. Like, they're like, I have, like, well, she's being an asshole, so we have to defend her. We're going to have to go and, read our children books about witchcraft.
Right. So did you have any other education related commentary?
Let me check my notes. I'm like, let me see. Oh, we did not address one other thing, and that is that charter schools have a huge problem with fraud. In 2014, the Center for Popular Democracy issued a report demonstrating that charter schools in 15 states, about 1/3 of the states with charter schools, had reported over $100 million in fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement since 1994. In 2015 and 2016, they released additional reports documenting millions of dollars in new alleged and confirmed cases of fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement. That's not great either. So there's that issue. And then also, I did want to address the fact that they pay teachers really poorly and do not require teachers to be actually qualified in any capacity. I have some friends who have worked for charter schools, and it's been really crappy for them.
Well, what's the appeal if they're not being paid well?
Well, because it's hard to, like, in Chicago, there are not a lot of jobs for teachers when my friend was looking for work. So, and that's what she went to school for. So, like, I think probably a lot of the appeal for people who are working there are that they don't have to, in some cases, they don't even have, like, bachelor's degrees. So in some cases, hell, they don't even have, like, high school degrees. Like, that is an actual issue. There's, like, in some states, there are people teaching charter schools, like I think in Florida, that did not even graduate from high school. So, like, there are no standards, and that's not super great.
Not even I mean, surely you should have mastered whatever it is you're teaching, but I guess they're not teaching high school. So if they're teaching 8th grade, it's like, well, I kicked 8th grade's ass. I might have had problems once I got to algebra or whatever, but look, I'm going to be able to get you through 8th grade. And so that's just that efficiency that the charter schools are bringing to education. They could probably just have high school students teach.
Yeah, why not?
And then, that's sort of the way. So with that gallows humor aside.
Also importantly, I have new nails. So, and they're very exciting. You're all very thrilled by them.
Oh, they are lovely.
Thank you.
All right. Well, once again, like, share, subscribe on the Wonkette page, and we will also see you guys next time. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Robin.
All right. Bye.